Hi, everyone. I'm Harry Goldstein. I am an assistant professor at the University at Buffalo, and this is joint work with Cameron Moy and Daniel Patterson from Northeastern. Software specifications are a critical part of the modern programming languages and formal methods landscape. Put simply, a specification is a representation of the way a program is supposed to behave. Specifications help us determine which parts of our code behave the way we expect, and which parts are hiding bugs, security vulnerabilities, and other issues. Specifications are also a critical foundation of the modern software engineering ecosystem. They're required for advanced approaches to testing, like property-based testing. They enable both automated and interactive theorem proving, and they may be the key to keeping AI-assisted software engineering tools in check. Given how critically important specifications are, we wanted to explore what we thought were some straightforward research questions pertaining to how novice programmers engage with specifications. We wanted to know how well novice software developers write specifications and how a university course that emphasizes specifications might help them improve over time. Unfortunately, we hit some pretty significant snags. In hindsight, we should have known better, but instead of learning about how novices write and interact with specs, we ended up stalled at a more fundamental issue. The novices didn't write the kinds of specifications we were expecting at all. The problem is that in our heads, asking someone to write a specification for some program meant asking them to write a very specific kind of specification that's common in formal methods. In particular, we expected our study participants to attempt specifications that were unambiguous, so their correctness should be a matter of some objective rules, not human judgment. They should be specific, which means the specification should give as much detail as possible about correctness. And finally, they should be checkable. We should be able to write a program, or indeed we should be given a program that ensures the specification actually holds the program. And I hope you can see why we like these properties. Given an unambiguous, specific, and checkable specification, we can easily learn a lot about whether a particular program does what we're expecting. But as I said, the novices didn't end up writing these kinds of optimal specifications. So today I'm going to present what they did write. I'll talk about the kinds of artifacts that novices present when asked for a specification, and I'll give a sense for how those line up or fail to line up with the kinds of optimal specifications that we were hoping for. And at the end, I'll talk a bit about why I think this matters and try to start some discussion about specification pedagogy. At its core, our study aimed to evaluate specifications written by students in a university course on logic and computation. We used 3 different survey instruments at 3 different points in the semester in hopes that we'd be able to see how student specification abilities evolved through the course. More specifically, we had 17 participants, all freshmen and sophomore students in Northeastern's CS 2800 course, which is titled Logic and Computation. And the course felt like a good choice for a study like this because the first line in the syllabus says, this course is about formal specification and how logic can be used to help reason about software. It just seemed like a good fit. In each phase, we gave our participants 3 tasks to accomplish, and this table summarizes the tasks. We categorized them into kind of easy, medium, and hard, depending on the complexity of the specification that we expected the students to write. And they exemplified a wide range of specification tasks that appear in the literature or that just felt kind of interesting and in scope to us. Since I only have a few minutes, I'm going to focus my talk examples on a single one of our tasks. In this task, participants were asked to write a specification for a stateful representation of an ATM. The core implementation that they were asked to specify was 3 functions. Clear resets the balance of the ATM. Withdraw removes some amount from the ATM, reporting a failure if there are insufficient funds. And deposit adds some amount to the ATM. We saw lots of approaches to this problem. But for our purposes today, I want to focus on 3 shapes of specifications that students submitted that kind of surprised us: types, unit tests, and approximations. The first of these, types, was primarily surprising because we provided contracts which were closely aligned with data types in the problem statement itself. Nevertheless, at least one student gave us a specification that ran each of the provided operations and simply checked that the output had some appropriate type. Now, we were thoroughly chastised in our reviews for implying that these kind of checks do not constitute some kind of specification. And indeed, a type is absolutely a specification. But this leaves a lot to be desired in terms of specificity. And we were hoping that participants would at least attempt to submit solutions that were a bit deeper than this. The next shape of specification we saw were straightforward unit tests. In this example here, the participant ran each operation once with some concrete inputs and checked that the concrete outputs were what they expected. This is a totally reasonable start as a specification, but once again, it's lacking specificity. Many buggy implementations of the ATM will still pass unit tests like these. We were hoping that participants would take this a step farther and abstract away the concrete inputs and outputs. And doing this might capture a larger range of behaviors and start to get towards a maximally specific specification for this ATM. The final one that I want to point out is one of my favorites. Here, there was a check like this, in which the participant actually did abstract away the input and the output, leading to a more precise specification. But then they made what I felt was a kind of confusing choice. Rather than check that the amount post-deposit was exactly the balance plus the new amount, they just checked that the balance didn't get any smaller when you deposited. I think this is a reasonable thing to check, but again, it's just like not as specific as it could be, and I was confused sort of why the student didn't take that one extra step. Overall, my main takeaway from these results was that asking a student for a specification is nowhere near clear enough if your goal is actually a highly detailed formal specification. Now, some of you in the room might be thinking, of course you can't just ask for a specification and expect the reader will know what you mean. And I'm open to the idea that I'm the only one who could have made this mistake. Also, don't come at my co-authors about this. I'm the one who wrote the survey copy. This is on me. But I'm also not sure that I'm the only person who underestimates how loaded a term specification actually is. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, a student of mine messaged me asking for help with the course they were teaching. They put these instructions in a homework assignment, which I think looked pretty reasonable, and they were confused why students were giving them single unit tests instead of higher level properties as specifications. My assertion here is that this is actually a very easy mistake to make, and that it's something we should be more wary of. As I said in the beginning of the talk, specifications are foundational to the way we talk about a lot of very important PL concepts. And if we're not careful about the way we present specifications to the uninitiated, we could end up causing confusion instead of clarity. Thank you. I have some questions that I'd love if the discussion could kind of point towards, but feel free, any feedback or questions would be great.
So we're going to come around with cards with pens. One of your goals as a group is to write down awesome feedback for our speakers. Another goal is to come up with nice questions to reflect back.
Okay. If you have okay, it's time for traditional question and answers now. I'll let Harry call his own questions. Let's see.
So in our group, we talked about how we were wondering how the phrasing of questions the students fit in with the course pedagogy. Both in the course, does this course teach specifications? Would you use the same words in the course, like contracts the course uses for specifications? And also the other pedagogy at Northeastern, which I guess involves things like purpose statements.
Yeah. Cameron, can you speak to this at all?
Yeah, so we definitely talk about what a specification is, what a precise specification is, things like that. And, I think when we use the language specification in the prompt, we assume that all of those things that we talked about, of course, students would remember those things and say, oh, yes, I remember what an under. But yeah, it seemed like, students, even though that they did learn about these concepts in the class, they remember maybe the simpler thing that they learned in the previous course about unit tests. But less so the things that they learned.
Yes.
The difficulties of teaching specifications is that in teaching you always have to use small examples, right? And there's a wide spectrum between like how like programs for which the specification is extremely similar to the program itself versus specifications being very different from the program itself.
Yeah.
So like Fermat's last theorem, wide, like big gap. This ATM example, if you were to write it like a fully precise specification, it would look basically the exact same as the program, right? So the students, I would imagine that some students may be trying to, like, you said like, why would a student say like, oh, the balance is going to be greater than what it was before? Maybe the student is thinking like, well, I can't just write the program.
Yes.
So they must be asking me to write something else.
So I do think that's what happened with this student too. I have no like concrete reason to think that, but that tracks. What I would argue is that that's making a lot of assumptions about the program, right? That like actually it is that simple under the hood. What if it's doing a bunch of logging? What if it's connecting to a database? What if it's doing like there's all sorts of things it could be doing under the hood that wouldn't be in that specification. And so like I would argue to that student like you know actually you don't know how close this specification might be to the program. But I definitely see your point that like when the specification sort of feels like it's close to how the program should be written, there's this temptation to be like, well, I can't just say that. Yeah.
Let's take one more question.
You have like the optimal things that a spec should have.
Yeah.
Is measured comprehensiveness wrapped in specification?
Yes. The terminology there was what I mean by specificity is by sort of cutting down the space of possible implementation. So narrowing into just specifically the correct implementation. But like you could view that the other way. In that case, I mean generality.
Okay, if you can pass your codes. That person.